All right. I think it appears as though we are live. I am hoping this is the case. I'm just double checking in our Facebook group if the video is showing up. Welcome everyone. I'm going to start as always with our little banner. For the last time, this is our last session tonight, to thank for the last time the beautiful people who have made this course possible all these weeks. I think we've had 14, maybe 15 sessions. I kind of lost track of all of them. But yeah, we've spent most of winter together, almost every week. And it has now come to that moment where I don't know what we're going to do next Tuesday night. We're gonna have to figure it out. Our life gonna have to figure a different way to get busy. But yeah, I just wanted to make sure that one more time we share all of those organizations that have trusted us to tackle this very important and challenging topic as we have all those months, which I hope we did in a way that was intellectually nourishing and mind expanding, and that allowed all of you who have been following this over the weeks to really gain the necessary understanding of what anti-Semitism is, how it shows up, how it historically has showed up, and how this history is carried over to today, just so that we can be better anti-Antisemites. All right, I think that was good enough. So I want to start, as always, with chanting shalom, with calling out, speaking out the word shalom. I think I am mindful tonight, as I have in the past few days, the past week, of the shalom that is deeply needed in our world. It is always needed in our world, but especially today, with the war again breaking out in Europe after 7 decades of peace. Talking to my family there, and they are a little bit more scared than all of us here, as you can imagine. So it is with all of the people who are suffering today in war and conflict, and really in that part of the world as in other parts of the world as well, that I invite you to close your eyes. I invite you to find your breath. And I invite you, if you so choose, as we chant shalom. You don't have to, it's up to you. That we imagine our voices resonating throughout the world. That despite all proof of the contrary, we are going to continue against all odds to be a voice for shalom. But if you are chanting and joining, take a breath now for shalom. יהיו לרצון אמרתי והגיון ליבי לפניך, Adonai. Holy One of Being, Holy One who expresses right now in the space between us, in the space within us. Help us to know that presence, that the words of our mouth, the meditations of our heart, the work of our hands might flow from the fullness of your being, Holy One. Adonai Tzuri Vegoali. Help us to remember that you, Holy One, are source, that you, Holy One, are liberator. Amen. So here we go. And I wanted to start tonight with a little detour. Our class tonight, our last session has been named How to Counter Anti-Semitism. Finally, we're getting to the how-tos. What are we going to do about all of this now? How are we going to actually be that voice, that presence, fighting anti-Semitism? But I want to start with a little detour because I have received so many emails and I've heard so many people talking to me about what is going on in Ukraine. People sharing that when they hear the news, they hear the names of the cities that are being shared, spoken about in the context of what is going on there in the war. And they tell me, oh, I know this city because my grandparents, my great uncles, all of the names of the main cities of Ukraine. Suddenly, it's very personal for the Jewish community here in America, right? We know those names. We know the histories behind them. Those are family histories. And so I wanted to offer maybe not an explanation, but a possibility of understanding what's going on and why the war. And I'm no war expert by far, but I wanted to share with you a map that I shared many sessions ago that I'm hoping will kind of plant a seed to explain what may be happening there. And here's what I shared many sessions ago. As you can see here, the map of the Pale of Settlement. Remember that I was talking about where Russia had really parked its Jews. The one place where Jews were allowed to settle, as you see on the map, between 1825 and 1917, which is the Bolshevik Revolution in Russia. And this is, there's two shades of green. The lighter shade of green is Russia itself, and the darker shade of green is the Pale of Settlement where the Jews lived. And that's why so many people have emailed me saying, Kishinev, oh, I know. Chernobyl, of course, Berdichev, of course, I know. We know all of those names because Ukraine, as you can see in the map, is right there in the middle of the Pale of Settlement. But take a closer look at the map. Of course, you have Ukraine there, but look a little bit north of where it says Ukraine. Do you see, kind of slanted, it says Belarus. Now, Belarus, as we know, is deeply involved with the war in Ukraine. But you see, if you go a little further north, there's Lithuania there. Also, it's written kind of slanted. And then on the left over there by Lithuania is also Poland. There's Warsaw right there, you can tell. Bialystok, right? So, why am I showing you this map? A map that was true and existed all the way to 1917 and the Bolshevik Communist Revolution, is because this dark green part of the map is a dark green because it is the same, it's a gradation of the green shade of Russia. All of this dark green belonged to the Tsarist Russian Empire. That's how far the Tsarist Russian Empire stretched into Europe, at the border of Romania, part of Poland, north in Lithuania and the Baltic countries. Like if you map this on the map of today, you see Belarus, you see Lithuania, you see all the Baltic states, you see Poland. Of course, you see Ukraine. And it is very much possible that a large percentage of Russians that may include Putin himself have aspirations, dreams, illusions, delusions of recreating the great Russian Empire. That they believe that, in fact, the communist regime lost all of these territories, and that, in fact, they have to regain the greatness of Russia at its peak of its expansion. And there are some political analysts, some political scientists, I've read many articles, who are in fact seeing in this war, in this conflict, part of this deeply nationalistic, I would say almost white supremacist, Russian supremacist, which is a little bit different than what we understand here in the US, to recover what they believe actually belongs to them. And so it's fascinating to me how Jewish history, as we learn it, can help us, as we look at this map, can help us perhaps understand, though it might not be openly shared, what may lie underneath the motivations of someone like Putin, who would not and does not look favorably in having Ukraine, look at the map, becoming part of NATO. So I'm always enjoying when Jewish history can help us understand modern history as it is unfolding in front of us. So that was just a little bit of a segue into what's going on here. I always like to think about what was going on there in those parts of the world. So how to counter anti-Semitism? How do we counter anti-Semitism? What are we, you and me, to do to fight that great evil, that everlasting, it seems, great evil? The core difficulty in combating anti-Semitism is that, as we have seen, as I hope I have made the case through these past few weeks, anti-Semitism is that anti-Semitism is a conspiracy theory. At its core, anti-Semitism is a conspiracy theory. And how do you fight? How do you fight and how do you defeat a conspiracy theory? And in truth, you can't. I know I'm not starting tonight on a very high note, am I? You can't. You can't attack what is in fact a completely irrational delusion with, what would we have to fight that? Logic? Rationality? Trying to provide proofs to the conspiracy theorist as to the absurdity of their worldview, of their understanding? You know what happens if you try to do that. Many of us have had those encounters over the years. They will immediately and without a second thought dismiss completely anything you would have to say. And they immediately will assume that you, with all of your logical, rational arguments, supposedly, are in fact part of the conspiracy. That you are, in doing what you're doing, continuing spreading those fake news, those false arguments, especially if you're Jewish doing it. Especially if you're Jewish. So our work, your work, my work, our work, isn't therefore with those who have already swallowed whole the conspiracy theory that is anti-Semitism, who have swallowed it hook, line, and sinker. For you and me, these people are already out of reach. You cannot reach them. You cannot reason them out of their beliefs. And it is very important for us to acknowledge that, so that we don't keep on banging our heads against those walls, wondering why nothing shifts. Our work, however, is to talk, confront, invite into conversation those only mildly infected by this disease, those who might still reside at the center of politics, whether left or right, those who are in fact working on themselves and in the context of society on eradicating their own racism, their own isms in general, their own prejudices, and to invite them to include in that work anti-Semitism as part of that other ism that needs attention, that needs to be worked through. So, I'm going to share with you a number of points on the key point of fighting, countering anti-Semitism. I would say key strategies to doing that. Point number one, you have to engage in countering anti-Semitism strategically. What I mean by that, and I'm really serious about this, that you cannot try and counter anti-Semitism if you're doing it like emotionally, agitatingly, or like ardently, passionately about it. You have to think of this work as engaging in practices to combat anti-Semitism strategically. Why? Because what we need in the first stage of this fight is to cultivate allies. And that is critical, that we need to cultivate allies wherever we find them. And if we're going to cultivate allies, being on fire might not be inviting to those who are, like I said, on the fence. They've not completely become sold to the conspiracy theory, but they are thinking about it. They are asking, they are questioning. And that to me is the key to all that follows. Think and act strategically, dispassionately, and talk and strengthen the political center on both sides of the aisle. Build partnership across the entire socioeconomic and political spectrum. Point number two, which flows from the first one, is to really clearly realize that this is not about the Jews. I know it might sound paradoxical, but fighting anti-Semitism is not about the Jews. It's about democracy. I can't emphasize this point enough. This fight against anti-Semitism is perhaps the fight of our life to protect and preserve democracy. And I'm going to say that several times tonight because it is very important to hear that. We have seen, I hope I have shown and demonstrated that time and time again, it is when nations or religions are having crises of identity within themselves, nations, religions, civilizations are having crises of identity, that anti-Semitism rises. And right now, I mean, we can see there is a war going on in Ukraine. Right now, the entire Western civilization is having a crisis of identity. globalization, changing demographics, global warming, and the consequent forced migrations from too hot countries to cooler Northern Europe and North America are threatening the core identity of the Western nation states. We have to be very conscious of that. And so maybe we are in fact witnessing, you and me right now, the evolution of the West, of Western civilization, to a post-nation state world. And that in and of itself brings about great anxiety for the future. People who are not or are resisting this evolution, who are fearful for their ancient or preferred way of life. They're looking around and they're seeing what they knew about America, about Europe, about England, about you name it. They're seeing this being changed and eroded, and they are kicking back. They are scared. And so we have Brexit, and so we have Trump, and so we have all of those movement of reactionary movements. Those are based on the fear of seeing the world evolving, leaving them behind, or shifting so fast that they don't recognize their neighborhood, the neighborhood that they idealize maybe used to be, make America great again, right? So we are looking really at this dialogue happening within our societies that are clashes, really, of an evolving civilization against a reluctantly blocking evolution from moving forward. And that provokes great anxiety, great anxiety. Whatever the case may be, anti-Semitism, as I have said before, has always been the canary in the coal mine of democracy. And combating anti-Semitism means working to strengthen democracy and democratic values, such as freedom of thought, freedom of worship, love of liberty, respect for the law, embrace of pluralism, and rejection of tyranny. All that I've just said, and I can repeat it, are keys to fighting anti-Semitism. You cannot have one without the other. We must protect, defend, and promote all of those democratic values. Freedom of thought, freedom of worship, love of liberty, respect for the law, embrace of pluralism, and rejection of tyranny. These are the 6 key components, it sounds paradoxical, of fighting anti-Semitism. And we have to find allies on the ground on this basis of healing the fraying social fabric of our country and fight anti-Semitism in its name. Again, it's not about the Jews. If we can in our fight reframe the debate that way, we can win those allies. We can rally people to say yes to that cause. Those who love freedom and democracy would be more inclined to fight that fight alongside us. Point number 3. Focus on the strength of our people, the Jewish people. focus on the strength of the Jewish people. As Jews, I'm talking specifically to Jews maybe right now who are here with us tonight. Focusing on our strength, focusing on the strengths of our history, of the Jewish contributions to the world. I know that it seems all these weeks that we are spent together that I have painted the darkest portrait of Jewish history through the ages. I am aware of that. That was the topic of the class. And so one might look back at this class and see Jewish history and the Jews in history as the perpetual victim, the perpetual punching ball of every civilization, of every kingdom, every empire, every nation. And one might be inclined to see the story of the Jews, the history of the Jews, as the ultimate tearjerker, the ultimate tearful story of the world. But the opposite is true. The opposite is true. Ours is not a story of victims. It is a story of survivors. And that's radically different. You know what it reminds me of? It reminds me of, I don't know if you guys know about the Czech Memorial Torah Scrolls. Have you heard of the Czech Memorial Torah Scrolls? We have one of those Torah scrolls at Bet Aleph. We've been blessed to have a Czech Memorial Torah scroll that has supported our community for decades and decades now. And these Torah scrolls, for those of you who might not know the history of those Torah scrolls, those are Torah scrolls that come from Central Europe, from the Czech Republic, mostly, that have been saved from destruction from the advancing Nazi armies, as they were kind of like we're seeing today, the Anschluss into the Sudeten land, and then Austria, and then coming very close, coming to the border with the Czech Republic. Jews who saw the Nazis coming went through the Jewish communities around Prague and in the different countrysides of the Czech countryside, and tried to save as many of those Torah scrolls and other Jewish artifacts from those synagogues before the Nazis rolled in and destroyed and burned down every synagogue in their path. The one city that was never burned or never was bombed during the war was Prague. And those scrolls, all the scrolls made their way to the basement of the Great Synagogue of Prague at the time. And so they hid them there, and they survived the war. But for the longest time, in many publications, Jewish publications, books that were written about these Torah scrolls, the Czech Memorial Torah scrolls, as they were eventually called, and a wording that for the longest time we too at Bet Aleph adopted to describe our Torah scroll, they were referred to as the Holocaust scrolls. The Holocaust scrolls. When they are, in fact, not the Holocaust scroll. They are not the Holocaust scrolls. They are the survivor scrolls. Because our story is a story of survival, of resilience, of thriving in the face of untenable circumstances. And despite the fact that only 7 decades ago, 1 out of every 3 Jews on the face of the earth was murdered, brutally murdered, the Jewish people thrives today as a culture, as a community, as a nation. It also reminds me, some years ago, a group of us did a tour of Central Europe, starting in Prague. I was talking about Prague, but also ending in Warsaw. And many of us go to these countries of Central Europe through, oftentimes through Jewish organized tours. And the theme of those tours really could be summed up as tours of mourning. Tours of mourning, traveling through these countries and mourning over the massive destruction and erasing of our people during the Second World War. And there is a historical truth to that. But when we got to the Jewish community, the remnants of the Jewish community of Warsaw in Poland, we heard, talking to these generations of Jews who have lived there, that they were deeply bothered by the fact that all of those groups were coming from all over the world to only seems to be talking about all of the death, right? And it bothered them so much that the Jewish community of Poland came together and lobbied the Polish government for decades to build a museum of Jewish heritage. And they wanted the museum to be celebrating, to be commemorating 1,000 years of Jewish life in Poland. 1,000 years of Jewish life in Poland. In those 1,000 years, there were long periods of peace and prosperity. And yes, there were some of the darkest times, as I have retraced during this course. They wanted that museum because they wanted to show that you couldn't reduce 1,000 years of Jewish history, generations of Jews in Poland, to just the last 4 years. You couldn't erase 996 years of Jewish life in Poland and focus only on those last 4 years. You, by doing that, would erase the richness and the contributions of those Jews in the Pale of Settlement that I just showed you. That was vast and beautiful. This area of the world where Jews resided, that gave us the greatest Talmudic scholars, as well as the most inspiring Hasidic mystics. So yes, we must honor the memories of those who were brutally murdered over those 4 years. But we also must celebrate 1,000 years of Jewish life. In the same token, we must name and honor the massacres of the Almohad against the Jewish community in Muslim Spain. But we also must name and honor the achievements of the greatest Kabbalists, Jewish poets, Jewish physicians, scientists, heads of states, commanders of armies, philosophers, from Moses de Leon to Moses Maimonides. What I'm trying to say here with these examples is that we Jews are not the perennial victims who must be coddled. We are not. We are like everyone else. We are a nation, a people in progress. Israel is a nation in progress, just like the US and every other nation is a nation in progress. And so I say yes. I say yes, we can and must take the criticism. And we must be the first ones to call Israel on its shortcomings and its failures to live up to its ideals, just like we do right here at home in the United States. We have every reason to be proud and to stand tall as Jews. Let me say that again. We have every reason to be proud and stand tall as Jews. We will not be erased. And we will not, as Brenda Anderson warned us some weeks ago, be removed from the national collective. Which leads me to point number 4. And point number 4 is support Israel. Now, support Israel, and not as in my country right or wrong. Not at all. Again, be the first one to criticize Israel when it betrays its ideals and endangers its democracy. And if you are a non-Jewish ally, I would expect you to do the same, and I will respect and thank you for it. Demand, in fact, that Israel right its wrongs. But hold also the critical truth that Israel is a political and historical miracle. The Jewish world, and it's really important for us to understand that as Jews living outside of Israel, especially Jews who were born before 1948. The Jewish world is very different since 1948 for each and every Jew living outside of Israel. And it is imperative that we acknowledge that. Because since 1948, since May 1948, we Jews are no longer at the mercy of our host nations. It's really hard for us to fathom because we were born or we grew up in a world that had Israel in it. And so the way that our host nations have related to us for the last 70 plus years has changed. We have to place ourselves in the positions of those Jews who lived, let's say, in Germany in the 1930s, before there was any Israel. Those Jews who had nowhere to go if hit the fan. Those Jews who really were at the mercy of their neighbors. I'm not even talking about, the hordes of state-sponsored anti-Semitic violence. Jews who lived in fear of their neighbors. We have to be very conscious that the existence of Israel changes, whether we see it or not, our ability as Jews to be living in foreign nations. Because we have a place to go now. There is a place for us to take refuge. There is one country in the world that can advocate for us, that can come and pick us up wherever we are in Ethiopia or anywhere else in the world when our community is in danger. There are armed forces that can stand between us and those who would seek to murder us. And that has changed actually the consciousness of Jews in those countries. We have felt the empowerment that Israel gives us and the sense of, oh, we can defend ourselves now. Jews before Israel did not have that consciousness. And if we are still doing fine here as Jews in America, in Argentina, in Uruguay, in France, or in Poland, it's because Israel exists. And our condition would revert back to being extremely precarious. Think about it. If Israel wasn't here. So do not take Israel for granted, and be conscious as a Jew of the freedom and security its very existence affords us. There was an article written by Roger Cohen. He's a columnist who recently wrote, and I quote, "I don't believe Jews would be just fine without Israel, any more than I believe the moon is a balloon." To criticize Israel is imperative. To disavow it for a Jew is a form of ahistorical folly. End quote. That a Jewish woman can walk down the streets of Tel Aviv today as a feminist woman, in a tank top, in a free and liberated society in the middle of the Middle East, is an achievement so great that it is often hard for many people to even grasp. And we should work hard to appreciate its magnitude. I am a Zionist, and I want us to reclaim that identity as we fight anti-Semitism. I am a Zionist in the sense that I believe in the right of the Jewish people to have a national home, dwelling in peace and security among the nations. I am a Zionist in the sense that I work for and support the evolution of Israel toward embodying the highest ideals of our time, knowing it is a flawed state as any other state, and ongoingly perfecting its own vision and its own project. I am a Zionist who believes that my Zionist ideals include a two-state solution and a peaceful resolution of a 100-year-old conflict with the Palestinians and all the other Muslim nations. And to those who might be brandishing the word Zionist as a slur or an insult, I will say that I will reclaim that word and wave it as a flag of inclusiveness, as a flag of peace, and as a flag of understanding. I will not keep silent. And that's how we fight also anti-Semitism. I will not keep silent in the midst of progressive groups that would like me to denounce or renounce Israel as the price of admission. What I'm trying to say here is that I think we have to be grounded in who we are in order to stand for what we are. And that segues into point number 5. Point number 5 is resist hierarchical identity politics. Resist hierarchical identity politics. And I'm going to quote Barry Weiss on this because I think in her book, and at the end I'm going to share again all the books and all the sources that I have shared with you throughout the class. But in her book, Barry Weiss writes about this. She writes, and I quote, "Corrupt identity politics on the political right," which she coined, it's very cute. Well, I don't know. "The Olympics of purity." That's what she understands. She frames that to be. On the political rights, identity politics is the Olympics of purity. But this identity politics on the right tell the Jews that they can never be white or Christian enough. Corrupt identity politics on the political left, she coined it the Olympics of victimization. It's interesting, right? The way she sees how on the left and the right, identity politics is defined. On the right is the Olympics of purity. On the left is the Olympics of victimization. And these form of identity politics on the left tell the Jews that they can never be oppressed enough. And she continues writing, "In these Manichaean views of the world, the Jews are either not white enough or they are too white. In both cases, Jews are framed as the enemy of the people." And she goes on to say, typically the only way out of this bind, so how to fight anti-Semitism, right? But in this case, the only way out of this bind is for the Jew to confess her sins and disavow part of herself. But a political movement or party that forces us to make this choice, i.e. to check part of our identity at the door, is not one worth joining. We should not make a deal to erase ourselves. To do so, and she ends that quote, to do so is to participate in our own slow destruction. It's a very powerful statement, I think. So we need to be courageous enough to fight anti-Semitism, to not bend ourselves to the wishes of the crowd, and to not give in to groupthink. Alliances that ask you to disavow or distort a fundamental part of yourself are not okay. They're just not okay. But alliances that allow you to come as your full self to work for the common good, those alliances, those organizations should be sought out. They should be joined. And because of this, as many of you members of Bet Aleph have witnessed, I have warned just a few years ago on Rosh Hashanah, if you remember, that if the growing progressive left continues to insist on what Barry Weiss called this Manichaean worldview, the Jews might find ourselves looking for a different political party to support. It was 6, 7, maybe 8 years ago when I gave that talk, I remember. And I remember getting emails that told me in no uncertain terms that I was out of my mind. Things have changed in the last 5 years. And I don't think I would get the same kind of feedback today. Unfortunately, I would say, very much unfortunately. But here we are. The principles of religious freedom and expression the respect and dignity of every human being as human rights are enshrined in the constitutions of democracies around the world. And though these principles have yet to be fully actualized anywhere, and I mean it anywhere, we must continue to work together toward eradicating any and every obstacle that stands in the way of their realization, so that we might fulfill the dreams of pluralistic democracies. And in doing so, we must reckon with what many scholars have called the longest hatred, anti-Semitism. And I believe this is why you are here. This is why you came tonight. This is why you came every night in all these months that we have come together. To gain the knowledge and the tools to be able to spot and confront anti-Semitism when and where it shows up, especially in your personal sphere. To call it out when it pops up in your Facebook feed or whatever social media you use, in your favorite news source, and at simply a dinner party, a coffee break with families, with friends, with whatever the social context of your everyday interactions. Because this is where the work is at for you and me. If we get into politics, if we become lobbyists, then that will expand. But you and me, are invited to fight anti-Semitism in the world in which we exist. And believe me, there is already plenty of it right there. We don't need to be worrying about where else can we find anti-Semitism to fight. It's right here. And in doing that, we still, looking at the micro and the macro, we can support Jewish organizations that work to confront anti-Semitism on a national and, let's say, even global level. That doesn't preclude us from doing that, right? We, in fact, can be a voice, and I would encourage you, as part of this, multi-layered package of how to fight anti-Semitism, not to limit yourself to that conversation at your local grocery store, though you need to have it, but also to support those organizations that are fighting on a bigger scale. Because through those, we can be a voice to condemn anti-Semitism globally. We can start and sign petitions. We can demonstrate in the streets. But most importantly for us, the work is really, by the quote-unquote water cooler at our place of employment, at the grocery store, in conversations with friends and acquaintances, in our neighborhood school district, and in our local politics. And in all of those spheres, in all of these contexts, we are asked to courageously speak up. That's really all we're asked, to courageously speak up. Like our speaker from the ADL, Mary, told us, one of the strategies is ask questions. Why do people believe whatever they believe about Jews? Engage people simply in a way that feels, again, non-threatening, but inquisitive. Oftentimes, that's all is needed to help people dismantle preconceived notions. If you ask the right question, you don't impose on them your worldview, but you open the door for them to look at it maybe from a different perspective, right? So it is to what that might look like for you, hopefully in very tangible and practical ways, that I want to turn to now by sharing just a few examples. Because I think examples usually are more helpful than just talking around things. So I mentioned, for example, right, supporting organizations, Jewish or not, by the way. I want to make sure I say that. Organization, Jewish or not, that actively combat anti-Semitism. I mentioned Eric Ward several times during this course, and his organization, which is based in Portland, whose name escapes me right now, is an organization that is not a Jewish organization, that in fact is completely involved in fighting racism and anti-Semitism. So it's not just Jewish organization. However, as Jews in the Jewish world, we know of organizations such as the ADL, as we were all blessed to encounter during the class, as one of those organizations. The American Jewish Committee, the AJC, is another one of them. The Simon Wiesenthal organization, the Simon Wiesenthal Center, is another one. But those are just three, and there are others, and you are welcome to do your homework as well. I was just bringing up those particular three. Another way, practical, tangible way, is to do your own anti-Semitic activism. Right? We don't need to just rely on those politicians or professional activists to be a voice against anti-Semitism. You can use your media platform to educate. Again, I'm saying to educate. I'm choosing those words very carefully, as you can see. To educate, not to attack. I think it's easy for us, and when we feel attacked, maligned, when anti-Semitic accusations just jump at our face, to want to punch back, to react immediately. That is not going to win those who we want to turn into allies. Those who are already gone, like I said earlier, they're gone. Don't worry about them. But those who could be potential allies, let's work in a way that we are more open-hearted and open-minded, and come from a place of wanting to educate, to share what we know, to speak out with hopefully the tools that you have learned through this course, for example. I'm really hoping that all that I have shared over these weeks and months have given you enough material, enough knowledge to feel comfortable engaging in a very holistic way with those who might, like I said, be teetering on the verge of swallowing whole the conspiracy theory of that is anti-Semitism. Beyond that, as be your own anti-Semitic political activists, petition your local representatives. Be active in your school district if you are a parent. Monitor your city council for their votes, their actions, their decisions, their conversations. Do not hesitate to join in demonstrations, local demonstrations in your town, your city, wherever you are, whenever is necessary. Oftentimes, physically showing up, even if we feel we are one of thousands, who cares? Showing up is critical and most important. Again, as part of being your own anti-Semitic activists, vote. elect candidates who overtly stand against anti-Semitism and stand against anti-Israel anti-Semitism. 3, a third example, talk to your neighbors. Talk to your neighbors. The case against anti-Semitism and against anti-Zionism must be made before all Americans. And you are the ones who can now make a learned, eloquent case at dinner parties and wherever conversations happen. So trust yourself, trust the knowledge you now have, and be the one to state the case against anti-Semitism wherever an opportunity arises. 4, and that's very specific, so I'm just saying it's very specific what I'm going to say now. The first 3 were more general. If you are actively involved with a left-leaning, left progressive organization because you love and you are dedicated to the cause they serve, do not remain silent when anti-Semitism or anti-Zionism arises. Just do not remain silent. It is so important. You know, it's like if you don't say anything, you know, it means that you are agreeing with what is being said. Do not erase yourself. And if you find yourself standing alone in that moment, know that you are in good company. Know that you are in good company. Know what you are fighting for. That's very important. What are you fighting for? Again, remember what I said at the beginning. This is not about the Jews. This is not about the Jews. Know what you're fighting for. You're fighting for democracy. Because a society that seeks greater equity, greater equality, and an end to discriminations and all isms of all kinds cannot do that while just ignoring its Jews or making its Jews the one exception to the project of ending all racism and discrimination. That is what you stand for, even if you stand alone in that moment. And know in your heart of hearts that that's what you're fighting for right then and there. For the values and principles of democracy, of pluralistic democracy. Hold those who profess those views of equity and equality and all of that, hold them to their own values. That's what you're fighting for. All right, 5. And that's going to be hard, but I don't think we can do it any other way. We must transcend the bipartisan politics of the day. I don't know which side you're voting on, but there might come a time, and maybe this time has already come, I don't know, but there might come a time when it is no longer possible for any one of us Jews to vote either Trump Republican or Ilhan Omar Democrat, which seems to be, as we look reality straight in the eye, it seems to be where both parties are heading. And so I can foresee a time when the centrist Democrats and the centrist Republicans will either create 2 additional separate parties or find that their political values are similar enough that they will be founding one centrist party. And this, I would venture to say, may be the one party where Jews will feel most represented and defended. I don't know. Some days when I see what's going on both sides, I'm like, oh, we are moving towards that. We may be moving towards that. Time will tell. In the meantime, as part of standing against anti-Semitism, we must, I said that at the very beginning, I'm repeating it here, we must seek allies. And those of you non-Jews who are part of this course, thank you. Thank you. I count you as allies. And so we must continue to nurture connections. And we must continue to support those organizations who recognize anti-Semitism and raise their voices against it. So wherever you are from, invite your synagogue, invite your church, invite your Scrabble club to partner with them and be in solidarity with each other. Well, maybe not your Scrabble club. I was just maybe making a case of one club too far. Maybe just play Scrabble at your Scrabble club. And, anti-Semitism doesn't need to be everywhere. But other than that, bring it to the awareness of whatever community you're a part of and be in solidarity with those organizations fighting anti-Semitism. 6, all of the above rely on one assumption and one assumption only, that our society holds its democratic, pluralistic, liberal values that support a multi-ethnic, multicultural, and multi-religious society. I said I was going to go back around this, and now I am. Any attempt to combat anti-Semitism in a society that no longer holds as self-evident these foundational values is doomed to failure. Let me say that again. Any attempt to combat anti-Semitism in a society that no longer holds as self-evident these foundational values is doomed to failure. And if this is the case, then I'm sorry to say, but we, once again, will have to pack our bags and move somewhere else, move to Israel. And I'm deeply serious about this. I don't want any of us to take this lightly or derisively. Please. It seems far-fetched. It seems it'll never happen here. But if you've listened from any session that we've shared together and the entire history of the Jewish people, every time we have said it's not going to happen here, and it happened. And sometimes we thought, well, maybe, but in a few generations, and then we were caught. So that's why I'm saying, I'm not raising the alarm quite yet. I'm not standing in front of you saying, is your passport valid? But I'm also not inviting us to take this, as the rabbi is being funny. I am not being funny. Because my family is in Europe, and I'm constantly watching what's going on in Europe, and obviously all of us are these last few days. And I think to myself, if Europe is only a decade, maybe two ahead of us, maybe I'm being too generous, we might see, as what we're seeing in France, but in other countries of Western Europe, waves after waves of Jewish immigration to Israel. And we are maybe just a decade away from seeing the same pattern reproduce itself right here in the good US of A. And we're not there yet. Right now, I'm beating this horse to death, but it is so critical. Right now, combating anti-Semitism is about strengthening the institutions of democracy everywhere. Why? Because we have seen during the Trump administration how fragile, actually, our democratic institutions really are. And that their viability, if you paid attention, their viability depends on those in power to believe in them and to want to uphold them. That was one of the shocking revelations of those 4 years, is that if you have people in power that just don't care, there's little that can be done but watch those institutions unravel in front of our eyes. As, let's not forget, we've seen it in front of our eyes. I have said it many times. That's number 7 now. During this course, support organizations, Jewish and non-Jewish, Israeli and Palestinian, here in the US or in Israel-Palestine itself, that are working toward peace and reconciliation between Israelis and Jewish Israelis and Palestinians. And actively support a version of a two-state solution that is still, to this day, until something else comes around, the most viable option out there. Again, maybe we don't think about this here in America, but we can find and we can support these organizations here at home and there in Israel, Palestine, that are working towards peace. Every trip to Israel that we have done in the years we used to go to Israel, we've always made a point to introduce the people who traveled with us to one of those organizations. I remember clearly, well, I could give several examples, of course, but one that really has stayed with me was one organization that had women on both sides of the Green Line. The Green Line is the Israel versus West Bank division. It's called the Green Line, who sought to empower each other through through producing, manufacturing goods that they would sell to locals and also to us tourists, of course, to empower women to take their own financial sustainability into their own hands, and therefore to support them gaining more and more independence and a voice in the context of, on both sides of Israel, a very male-dominated society, with the goal, with the ultimate goal, at least the intention, that bringing women into places of power, whether it's economic or political power, could and hopefully would change society in such a way that peace might be possible, change minds. And especially this organization was both Israeli and Palestinian women. And so it also created connections And when you create connection, then you cannot demonize the other when you see them face to face, working together with you. And there are many others in Israel, as they are right here in America, that are, that are on the ground making a difference. These are the organizations that we need to support. I can't stress that enough. And in conjunction with that, we have to counter any discourse that demonizes either side. See, one of the problems that I saw when last year's conflict between the Hamas and the Israeli Defense Forces, with the rockets and the counterattack, missiles falling on civilians in Israel, bombing happening on civilians in Gaza. What I saw that was disheartening was the verbal violence and the extremism that exploded on social media platform, all of them. And what that did is that it broke down the possibility of conversation and of dialogue, and therefore it radicalized each side of the conflict here in America. American Jews and non-Jews. And so what I saw was that even those who make this violent argument against Israel in defense of the Palestinians, that demonize Israel to such an extreme, are closing opportunities, in fact, by radicalizing those on the other side who might not inherently be radicalized, be perhaps willing, even really willing to look for solution. It creates such polarization that I have come to realize that it does great disservice to the Palestinian people itself, because it stops the possibility of reaching peace. So it's so counterproductive. And in the name often of Free Palestine, all of those slogans, that in fact that violence, that angst, that anger is so radical that it does the opposite than what it seems to be wanting for the Palestinian people. So counter those discourses that only breeds more hatred and push us farther away from a peaceful resolution and independence for the Palestinian people, peacefully alongside a secure Israel. 8. Lean into Judaism and nurture your Jewish identity. And it's like when you do interfaith work. In order to be able to do interfaith work, you have to be able to know your tradition so well that you are able to communicate it as clearly as you can. So being in an interfaith context, contrary to what a lot of people believe, that interfaith is just the meshing up of all of those religion into this universal goo that means nothing. No. If you really are part of an interfaith process, you need to know your stuff. Because that's from your knowing will others be able to engage in understanding you. And that's the same thing. Lean into your Judaism and nurture your Jewish identity. Judaism at its base, at its core, teaches ethical monotheism. You can look it up, but that's really what it is. Beyond the spiritual and the mystical, at its core, at its base, Judaism teaches ethical monotheism. It teaches respect of the other, respect of the stranger. It lifts up the downtrodden. It heals the sick, as we say in one of our prayers called the Amidah. And it has always worked to better the societies that have welcomed it in its midst. We don't have to be religious to uphold Jewish principles and to work toward tikkun olam, healing the world. As we have seen throughout history, Jews have embraced all the latest isms, because each time they thought to themselves that finally this ism is finally going to be the path that is going to eradicate anti-Semitism, that is going to finally welcome the Jews into the mainstream world. We have been communists, we have been socialists, we have been capitalists, we have been leftists and rightists, we've been secularists, we have been humanists, Jews have been anarchists, existentialists, physicists, and even Catholics. You name it, Jews have tried it. We have tried to convert to anything, religious or non-religious. We have tried to assimilate. We have tried to isolate, and we have tried to dissolve ourselves and become completely assimilated. In every generation and through every try, the very anti-Semitism we believed this time will disappear, came back with a vengeance. You've taken all of those classes. You know what I'm talking about. And so the next ism won't be any different. Don't fall for that next ism. So maybe, just maybe, simply being Jews is what we do best. Maybe that is our gift to the world, our contribution, our uniqueness. Here's what Barry Weiss suggests about how to nurture our Jewish identity. Quote, decide to have Shabbat dinner every week. Send your children to Jewish day school. Book a trip to Israel. Binge watch Shtisel on Netflix. Read Yehuda Amichai. Read David Grossman. Read Geraldine Brooks. Sign up for classes on Jewish mysticism, on Jewish meditation. Barry Weiss says that, and I didn't pay her to write this. Subscribe to a Jewish or Israeli publication. Give to a charitable Jewish organization. Unquote. 9. Tell your story. As a Jew, tell your story. Maybe it is connected to engaging in conversations with your neighbors and on social media. Jews have a unique story with immigrant ancestry coming from all over the world. Tell your story. People will want to know. Practice a Judaism of affirmation, not a Judaism of defensiveness. Tell your unique story. Tell the story of the Jews. And if you don't know the story of the Jews, learn about the history of the Jews. Maybe this rabbi will teach the history of the Jews as his next class. Who knows? Tell the world that we are from everywhere. That we are Arabs from North Africa and the Middle East. That we are black from Ethiopia. That we are brown from Latin and South America. That we have millennia-old communities in India and China. That we are all colors, all languages, all cultures. Tell whomever wants to hear that here in America, about 20% of the Jewish communities Jewish community are Jews of color. Tell them that we seem to be the only white folks around who have their rabbis trained to respond to attacks and hostage situations, that need to have armed guards and impregnable security systems at the door of their institutions. Tell your story. That is the best you can ever do. Let people know who the Jews are through you. 10. Wear a kippah. Wear a kippah or a Jewish star. Wear your Jewish star proudly around your neck. If you live in a city or a neighborhood where that is still a safe thing to do. And if you do wear a kippah or wear your Star of David outside, make sure you tip well. Make sure you tip well. You don't want to propagate that anti-Semitism. Be on your best behavior when you interact with people in the world. Let people know, that's why I'm saying that, let people know that they have met a Jew. Because we are mostly invisible to people. And it's easier to fall into anti-Semitic conspiracy theory if you have never met a lovely, beautiful, engaging, smiling Jewish person. So wear it out and wear it proud. And if your neighborhood or your city is too dangerous for you to do so, consider moving somewhere else. Consider moving somewhere else. 11, and it's going to be my last point. Don't trust people who seek to divide Jews, even if they're Jews themselves. Don't trust people who seek to divide Jews, even if they're Jews themselves. Anyone who participates in dividing us, one may think, and I'm not going to name names, of a small cohort of anti-Zionist Jews who insist that the only real Jews are the ones who disavow Israel. Those who participate in dividing us are doing to themselves what Farrakhan does to us, insisting on separating out the good Jews from the satanic Jews, right? So there are many more examples of what we can do to combat anti-Semitism. If you engage in one of those or two of those in this long list that I've shared with you tonight, any one of those, we will all be better off. Now, I'm going to share very briefly again some of the sources that I have used for this class. Jewish history, so that you'll have them. Jewish history, there are 3 main books that are really excellent. This one is very thick, but really good. It still has the bookmark here. A history of the Jewish people by H. Ben Sasson. That's if you want to increase your Jewish history knowledge. The other one, I'm just going to share the cover here because it's just blue. A History of Jews by Abraham Leon Sachar. Abraham Leon Sachar. Those are, kind of the most reliable, most known sources. My favorite because it's written in, an easy way to read, and it's really clear. It's The Jews, A History by, here it is, by John Ephron, et al. You can just do et al. And you'll find them. Those are 3 great books on Jewish history if you want to deep dive into Jewish history. I've shared that on the BDS specifically, on the boycott, divest, sanction, and all of the anti-Semitism at Israel, great source. Gary Nelson, Israel Denial. Really good source. Again, Gary Nelson, Israel Denial. That's really, for that topic specifically. General books on anti-Semitism, I would go with The Longest Hatred, Anti-Semitism by Robert Wistrich. It's a little bit of an older book. He's got a lot of things here on anti-Semitism in Muslim lands. The one that I have relied, the two that I've relied upon for the first half of the course, I mentioned that one, Constantine's Sword by James Carroll. This is all the references at the beginning about Judaism v. Christianity. Great source for that if you want to deep dive into the anti-Semitism of the church. A Convenient Hatred, The History of Anti-Semitism by Phyllis Goldstein. Great book. This is a historical book, so it goes through Jewish history from anti-Semitism. This one tries to talk about the reason for anti-Semitism. Why the Jews? Two great scholars, well known and venerated, Dennis Prager and Joseph Telushkin. They've written many other books. Dennis Prager and Joseph Telushkin, Why the Jews? Also a little bit on the older side, but the question is still relevant, so why the Jews? Where is my... I don't see it. I should have had it here. Well, that's bothering me now. Anyway, Deborah Lipstadt, Anti-Semitism Here and Now. Great book. Barry Weiss, I've quoted her tonight in lengthy ways. How to Fight Anti-Semitism. This is a very short book, also easily readable on just one Saturday afternoon. This one specifically talks about the erasing of the Jews from the progressive left. Jews don't count. David Badiel. But the one that I don't see, why did I not grab it, is the one we really started with. Where is she? Help me out.
People Love Dead Jews.
People Love Dead Jews. Thank you, Stu. Thank you very much. People Love Dead Jews. Great little book as well. I'm going to share one more resource. If you want to deepen your... let me see. Hang on a second. If you want to continue deepening your understanding and knowledge of anti-Semitism, there's this amazing, absolutely amazing website that I'm sharing with everybody now. Out of the Indiana University, Bloomington. And I'm going to put in the chat room the link. They have webinars. You can see here just a few of very well recognized international speakers that they gather who talk about different topics related to anti-Semitism. It's an absolutely beautifully curated site, and they're doing incredible work to educate people on this topic. Those are not the only universities to do that. I found some really great thing happening at the UW, and you might just want to Google that. The UW is offering. They have a podcast. They have obviously classes, and a lot is available online and for free. And it's right here for us who live in Seattle. It's right here in our backyard. But please check out, if you're interested, Indiana University Bloomington, specifically this page, Study of Contemporary Anti-Semitism, and just enjoy those webinars. They are just incredible. I am putting here in the chat to everyone the link. Everyone else, you'll have it on the recording. So here we go, my friend. This is the end of this course. I'm happy to entertain more questions. I'm also mindful that it's 8:40-ish. But thank you for being here. I can't tell you how wonderful it is to have had so many of you steadfast here on Zoom every week, but also so many of you watching online on our YouTube platform, and the numbers are growing. Please, this is free. This is available to everyone. If you find it valuable, share it. This is offered to the world. We need to share this information with as many people as we can. And if you want to support this work, as always, you're welcome to make a contribution on our website, betaleph.org. This is important and this is critical. And remember, we are doing this to save democracy, really, to strengthen and shore up democracy. That is our goal. So any question before we close this course that has carried us through the winter? Look at that. Spring is just around the corner.
It's been fabulous. It's been just amazing. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Yeah, thank you very much, Olivier. And I'm wondering, do you have all of your resources in one place where you could just print out a page?
I will. Yes, I've been asked to do that. And so I will do this. Well, if you ever made a donation that you are in our database, if not, you can just email me and I'll send it to you in person. But we'll probably just do a group email with that attachment so that everybody can have that one page.
Is it something that you could post on the Facebook page?
So I've posted a lot of that along the way.
Yeah,
On the private Facebook page. So the problem with that is that you would have to scroll back down. So I might just post that one again, so that it's on the top again of the Facebook page. Thank you for suggesting it.
Thank you.
And for those of us who really don't do Facebook, if you sent an email, that would be nice too.
Yeah. So if you are on our mailing list, we will do that.
Oh, I am.
Definitely do that. No, on the mailing list of those who made a donation, and therefore we're on that Excel spreadsheet.
I should be.
All right, good. Then it's great.
All right. And in true nudge fashion,
Yeah.
I'm already going to pressure you about the next class.
Okay.
I love your idea of a history of the Jewish people. If you do that, that would be wonderful.
Okay. I'll put that in the.
Oh, I have another suggestion, but I'll just email you.
All right. Rachel and X.
Hi, awesome class. I feel like I want to just share quickly with the group. You guys have heard my question again and again about addressing my child's school.
Yes.
Because something came up. And I think that I just want to share a couple of small things. I did start talking with the vice principal at the school. And I was quite nervous, but she was quite receptive.
Oh, good.
It was around the book, The Lemon Tree, that is about Israel and the conflict and whatnot.
Sure.
And sorry. And so, sorry, family chaos coming up. But to make a long story short, you know, one of the accusations that come up were related to nationalism, and that is an anachronism. And in the context of the school and the class, there was a lack of understanding that nationalism was vogue in Europe, that she hadn't heard of the Judenfrage. So when I explained to her about the nationalism and how the Jews were excluded from that despite the attempts to become part, and that's why when, you know, Herzl came with nationalism, it was essentially survival.
Yes.
That was, it really made her stop and think. And I also talked to her, I said, well, have you heard of the protocols of the elders of Zion, which she hadn't. And to try to be somewhat succinct, she was really like this notion of what she called perceived power, false power, and that how the equity work tends to look at the sort of the underdog, but the perceived power. And she began to really understand that anti-Semitism has to be part of this discussion.
Wonderful.
Yeah, it was great. So thank you so much for all
Well,
of
thank you for closing the loop and letting us know how everything ended. That's really great.
Well,
Thank
it
you.
is still in process, but I just wanted to share, you know, where we are now. So thank you.
Thanks,
Good
Rachel.
work, Rachel. Good work.
Good for you. Good for all of us.
Yes, thank you. I've shared this with a number of people and groups, and especially my family, and they really do appreciate this class.
Good. I'm glad. Okay. Let's close with shalom then.
Well, I have a question, Olivier.
Sure. Yes. Sorry.
What I'd like to share the whole thing with other people,
Yeah.
but to see the recordings, they have to make a donation, right?
No, there are
Oh, they
those
don't?
recordings are, they're welcome to make a donation. We're never going to push anyone away.
Sure.
But no, they're all available for free on YouTube.
Oh, on
Anytime.
YouTube.
Yes.
Okay, great.
So go to Bet Aleph, you know, go to YouTube, key in, you know, in your search bar, Bet Aleph Meditative Synagogue. That'll get you to our main page. And then you can actually click on, you know, some of those videos are actually bunched together, so you don't have to scroll the timeline. Just go through and look for the playlist. And the playlist will have all of the videos. I think there are 14 of them in order. And people can just go through that.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. Then we can shalom. And take a breath for shalom.
Shalom.
Thank you. Good night.
Well, Danny.
Good night and thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you.
Toda rabah.
Bakasha.